What is up, guys? Welcome back to another Twinmotion video, and not only just Twinmotion video, but a video that I have made. Wow. It has been a while, and I do apologize, and I will have an update video for you soon, but in this video, we are looking at, I know a bit late, a couple weeks, but it doesn't matter. You need to know it's Twinmotion 2023.2 Preview 1, so that, yeah, a lot of stuff here. I know it's just a preview, a lot of good things still in the preview, so the first big thing, and I'm going to pull this over here before we even get into Twinmotion itself, is, in fact, the different versions of Twinmotion. This is, I don't want to confuse you, and I don't want to confuse myself, because there's a handful of things that have changed, but in the end, really nothing has changed. So they used to call a free trial or free edition or whatever, is now called the community edition. The thing you need to know with that is it's, again, non-commercial, just like the free. There are some limitations that we have, mainly with the Twinmotion Cloud and full resolution. You know, we don't have that. It's just limited to 2K or 1080p exported images, which, fine. I mean, it is what it is. Basically, you still have the full program, and obviously not valid for commercial projects, hence community or free edition. So that's always there, always been free. Now, we now have this education edition, which actually is the exact same to what we currently have, and I believe it's still called the education edition. The only thing with that is that you still cannot use that for valid commercial projects. So is there a difference between these two? Well, obviously we have the Twinmotion Cloud and the full resolution, but in terms of whether you're using this or not, I would just immediately go to the education edition if you're not using this for commercial projects. So obviously choose the right one for you, but if you're learning, clearly education is the way to go, and it gives you literally every feature that you need in the whole project, in the whole model, in the whole everything. The whole program is at your disposal. Obviously, you can't use it for commercial projects. So with that, let's move on to the actual release notes of Twinmotion 2023.2. And then obviously this is a preview 1. So we'll have a full release, which is not this, but yet we have all of the release notes. So the big thing here is Lumen. And so what is Lumen? Well, Lumen is, in fact, the background lighting processing that is going on while you have your model, while you're running around and everything. And it's not something you really think about, but it's something you definitely notice and definitely see, because obviously light is a big part of any sort of 3D modeling program, and especially one like Twinmotion. But I remember back 2020, Twinmotion 2020, a lot of the comments that I was receiving, of course, on this channel, but even whenever I'm showing this off to coworkers and colleagues, they're saying, oh, the ambient inclusion is terrible. It looks like all of these objects that are actually sitting on the ground are floating. And that's just because the lighting system was a bit lacking, and it was very far behind some of the other programs that we were used to seeing and just having higher quality. But now this Lumen, it's global illumination at its absolute finest. So you might have heard of Lumen if you are familiar at all with Unreal Engine, as starting in Unreal Engine 5, Lumen was released. And so basically, what is Lumen? It is it's a lighting system, but there's more to it than that. It's what's happening in the background that allows it to be great. Basically, it processes the lighting and everything that you need to see within the shot appropriately, and manages that throughout the scene to where you're always maintaining almost like a racing quality level of illumination, which is kind of crazy. All right, and where will we find this Lumen if we want to not only turn it on, but see what it looks like? Well, we will go into the ambience here, ambiance, click our properties, and you might think it's in global lighting, and that's where I thought it would be as well. But let's go to the render, because what's actually happening is that it's basically real-time rendering, which is exactly what we want. And so, of course, we're used to the path tracer. I'm just going to turn this on real quick so you can see the difference between just basic real time and then the path tracer, because the path tracer is really important here. We're all very familiar with what the path tracer can do and has done for us. All right, and here's the path tracer result for us. Again, looks really good. I specifically chose this model that doesn't have any materials, anything like that, so we could see how the light interacts with just blank material and water. Obviously water looks really good. So that's path tracer. We're used to that. We know what that looks like. So let's go back to real time. And so the standard is using just a basic volumetric renderer that isn't that special, but you'll hopefully notice here whenever we click Lumen, the difference. And so I'm going to click Lumen, and would you look at that? So, I mean, the water could use a little bit of love, but I will say, obviously, we're using this in real time. And so the difference between standard and Lumen, I'll switch back and forth here and kind of every now and then. And so we could see, everything just looks a little more flat. And with Lumen, we really start to see the volume that is within the kind of the obvious dimension of the model, because there is that, and the light will do that. And as I move around, it looks so much better. And again, you could see how flat and awful this looks. And then Lumen, just the ambient occlusion, the obvious change in the lighting is very obvious. And so I could go crazy with this, and we will in another video. We'll have a separate video that is specific for Lumen, because you can see here, as soon as I click Lumen, there's a ton of different settings, and obviously qualities and sliders. There's a lot of things that we can prioritize, and so I want to save a separate Lumen video for all of that, looking at the specifics of that. Now, I want to point this out. I'm going to close the properties here, because I do want to bring up your attention to the stats here. And so the main thing, and I probably should have left that up with Lumen, is that this is going to use a lot of VRAM, and that is video random access memory, basically RAM dedicated to video, or the RAM in your graphics card. So a lot of times the graphics cards, I would say, would have at least 8 gigs. Now, if they're any sort of newer card, I would look to 12 or more, just to make sure that you're not going to be limited by what Lumen can offer. You don't want to have a nice new feature that you can happily use, and that's going to give you a vast improvement to the quality of your work, and be limited by something like a video card. So we can see here, the GPU RAM is at 42%, and whenever I put that down to standard, my hope and my thought is that it would go down, just because, for obvious reasons, we're going from a standard to kind of a real-time render. But in fact, it doesn't, and it might just be that I'm getting lucky with the type of card that I've got. And so make sure that you get a high-quality card with at least 8 gigs of video RAM. That would be my opinion. So take that for what it is. So the next thing here, obviously we're limited by a few things, and those limitations are like the big LED walls that came out a few releases ago are not going to work with Lumen. Same with like the scattered vegetation that you throw out there and paint all that vegetation. It's not, unfortunately, yet. It will, I'm sure. It's not yet going to respond and be affected by the Lumen global illumination, which is unfortunate, but obviously we can't have everything all at once. The next thing here is what is called EV100 real-world lighting support. So what does that really mean? Well, that is, in a sense, changing the way we look at intensity when it comes to the sun specifically. So obviously, we need to go back to ambiance here and environment. And just for the sake of this video, I will leave Lumen on so we can continue to see what this looks like. So we can see here that I do have, obviously, different details here within the sun. So the sun intensity obviously used to range from the various levels. I think 25 might have been the lowest, or maybe even 0. But right now, it does now go down all the way to 25. The sun does, in fact, go all the way down to 0. And if I do that, you can see that the Lumen responds appropriately. I've got a few lights in here, but with the sun to 0, basically as if the sun does not exist, this is what I'm getting. This is all kind of pretty obvious stuff that we're used to seeing here. But then the real thing to note is that if I'm actually reading directly from the release notes here, it says that they'll now support a real-world light value of sun intensity, which is in lux, and that is spanning from 65,000 to 100,000 lux. This brought on an increase and updated auto exposure algorithm, which is great, because I've always had plenty of issues with auto exposure and using it, and even forgetting that it's on. One big pet peeve of mine, not having and not using real world values. So this is one step in the right direction. Even with auto exposure on, you're going to get more real values. So that's fantastic. I have lots of other videos on auto exposure, so go check those out for sure. So basically, you're looking at a sun intensity value that they recommended between 25 and 100,000. Obviously, you start on the lower end, but at a default, keep it at 25 if you want to actually have any sort of real sun values. Obviously, we're at 4 now, so maybe 25. Yeah, that looks, it's fine. Obviously, the type of thing that we want to continue to play with. The next thing here, if you do scroll down to exposure, obviously I have auto exposure on, but turning that off, we can see, yep, I can fully see what my sun value does, and you can see it goes all the way up to 150,000 actually, all the way down to 0. So, wherever you feel like you need to keep it, I would say that 25 is a good starting point. But coming down here, I'll turn auto exposure back on for the sake of this video. We can see that we actually now have something called local exposure. And so when we expand this, it's not enabled by default. So let's enable this. And so what is happening here? Well, I can see, basically we're maxing out the highlight reduction and shadow boost of local exposure. Now, I'm going to read this just because there's no more context given here. And it's saying that we now have obviously this local exposure option here, but it's useful whenever you're dealing with high dynamic range. So like you say you've got a lot of light, a lot of sun, very high values, and maybe real dark spaces, and kind of the contrast of them both. You can introduce this exposure setting. Specifically, I'm not exactly sure kind of the limits of it or the extents. It's a little vague, and the description doesn't tell you at all. But what I'm getting at is that within the frame that you're looking at, there's some sort of a fixed distance, I'm sure it might just be within the frame, that you can affect the highlights and the shadows specifically for this. Now, whenever I turn auto exposure off, I do actually still have this as an option, which is really nice. And you can see how this does improve things based on a highlight and a shadow aspect, because I might be using this if I did want to boost those levels up more locally. The nice thing is, well, let's go ahead and turn auto exposure off, and we can kind of see that as we move around, how this might start affecting the scene. Well, yeah, I can't say that I see this, but let's go ahead and toggle it off. And obviously there's a big difference. And that's nice because I'm kind of toning everything down with the highlight reduction, and then kind of boosting up the shadow. So I'm really introducing more real world contrast that I would expect to see just from clicking this local exposure, which I think is really nice. It's a nice change, even with auto exposure off. So obviously you can have it affect more or less between 0 and 1, all that type of thing. It's pretty nice. The next thing we're looking at is glass optimization. And so if we look into our materials here, we can see glass. There is now just a clear glass material. And if we click on this material, I'm going to actually apply this to the railing here. And we can see that, yeah, it does seem to have all of our information here, but we actually have a basic option. And so clicking on basic, we can see that, yeah, we have really everything that is basic. But the details that I'm seeing here is that it's really where you'd want to use this is to optimize when you have multiple layers of glass and you're really going for that clear glass look. So I would say most of the time I'm not going to try and use this, but it is very simplified, and that's kind of the idea. So if you've got multiple panes of glass, you might look to use this basic clear glass material because it's going to give you better quality when it comes to dealing with the fact that it's glass and it's clear and you have multiple layers. So, hey, that's fine. Pretty simple stuff, but nonetheless, a quality update for sure. The last thing here is we want to look at Sketchfab. And obviously, we love Sketchfab. There's a lot of different things here. We'll go to architecture and just download something real quick, something smaller, I will say. Now, let's go ahead and say these things here. These are obviously fairly small. These light poles, low poly. This is great. So basically, the update is that if you remember from any other version of Twinmotion, the fact that we had Sketchfab integrated was fantastic. But the difference is that we now have the exact same everything, except whenever I bring in a model, let's go ahead and bring in this model. I want to show you what it looks like in the hierarchy. So clearly, this is not where I want this. I don't really want this anywhere in this model for sure, but let's go ahead and place it here just so we can start to get a good look at it. So here we go. We got a bunch of street lights. These do look pretty good for what they are. Obviously, we don't need this in our scene, but let's see that we've got our light poles. Immediately, like the update should be pretty obvious. If you remember it all from any sort of import that you had from Sketchfab, it all came in as like one giant folder, one model. There was no way to take this, take that, and use what you needed, or extract this, or only keep that. Well, now we have every single piece, like literally every single individual model comes in as its own individual model. And that was always the case if you downloaded it directly from Sketchfab, but you had to do that in the past. But now you can literally just hide or delete all of these individual things. Say maybe you only want to see this one. I don't know. Just as an example, you have this light bulb. This is exactly what you need. You can obviously copy this or move this to a different folder. But look at that. Like you have exactly what you need. So basically every piece of within the Sketchfab is going to be by default come in as its own model, as it should. I mean, really, let's be honest. That's exactly the way it should come in. So the last thing I want to look at is the preferences panel, and you'll find that all of that we just covered in this whole video is found within this. So the Sketchfab library import, this is again not checked by default, but if you wanted to go like it used to, have everything come in as one piece, just check that in. So that works as well. Obviously, Path Tracer, if you want to use this, is still there. But something I want to point out is if you want to use Lumen, you'll need to use DirectX 12, and that obviously requires a certain video card that works with DirectX 12 and has those capabilities. So that's really important as well. And something that was not necessarily mentioned with the Lumen itself is in the qualities. And finally, if you did want to use Lumen, one more thing that was not brought up is within the settings, you'll actually have to use at least high, like a preset here of high, if you want to use Lumen, or it will not have any impact. And I cannot say why. Obviously, it seems to require a lot more hardware, so clearly you're going to start using that whenever you use high. So use as high as you can. And the unfortunate part now, and this obviously everything's going to change, we do not have access to Lumen within VR, and the demand that VR requires already is outstanding. So that begins to make a little bit of sense to me. So you can only expect that. But I will say you can clearly see everything that's going on. And I've mentioned this before in previous videos, but the direction that Twinmotion is going is literally kind of a dumbed down, I don't like to say this, but a dumbed down, kind of easy version of Unreal Engine. Unreal Engine is amazing. In my opinion, the best gaming engine in the world. And the fact that we have an easier version of it that works with architecture specifically, in my case, is fantastic. And so you can start to see all these features coming in from Unreal Engine into Twinmotion. They're basically trickling down. In this case, Lumen is amazing. So that will do it for this video. Twinmotion 2023.2 preview 1. Of course, preview. We will come out again with another video with the full release. And be sure to look out for that Lumen video. And we're going to really dive pretty deep into Lumen and all the settings and really more what you can expect with Lumen as you use it. And so you don't have to mess with it. I'm going to do that for you. So be sure to stick around for that video. So again, thank you very much for watching this video. I am back for all intents and purposes. Obviously very busy. Look for an life update video coming out from me pretty soon. And I'll see you in the next video. Have a wonderful day. Thank you very much for watching.